So in the last video, we added basic materials to our scene, but something's missing. That's right, our crab has no mouth. So to help us paint on our model, we're gonna go and use Substance Painter, which you can actually grab a free trial of and even grab it alongside Maxon One and After Effects with a very affordable bundle option. So let's go ahead and jump back into Cinema 4D because the first thing we need to do is prep our model to be able to export it to use in Substance Painter. All right, so first things first, we have a bunch of materials here, and how Substance Painter works is each material that is applied to an object will get its own texture set that you can then create a material or texture set for. So in our instance, what we actually just want to do is just deal with the claws and the head or the body. And we're going to place like a little spot on the belly, a little smiley face, and some lines for the crab's claws. All the other objects we really don't care about too much. So to create our own texture set, what I'm going to do is you can see that our red material here, if we go to the Assign tab, you can see all of the different objects that have this red material assigned to it. And what we want is a separate material that will apply to just the claws and the body, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I still want the same red color, so I'm gonna Command or Control click and drag to duplicate this red material. I'm gonna double click and rename it Crab Details. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna apply this new material to both the claws and the crab body here. So to do that all at once, I'm actually gonna select the 3 material tags here by holding the Command or Control key down and adding to selection. And you can see in the tag tab, we have this red material applied. But if I go and drag and drop the crab details material, you'll now see that that is the material that is applied to these 3 objects here. So another thing we have to do for Substance Painter is we need to UV unwrap these objects to be able to paint on them. And UV unwrapping is the process of taking a 3D representation of some objects and flattening them out. So it's kind of a technical process. You could do a whole video series just on that discipline, but we're gonna do this very easy and very quick and dirty. So the first thing we need to do is to be able to edit and create new UVs, we actually need to make these objects editable or basically bake them down to just raw geometry. And when we do that, we'll actually lose these parametric features like the radius and segments, and we'll just be left with the resulting geometry. So I'm going to select all these 3 objects, hit C to make this editable, and you'll see that we lost those parametric options, but what we can do now is select these 3 objects and go to the UV edit mode in Cinema 4D. So once I do that, you can see once I go down to, say, the crab body and the claw, you're not seeing anything change over here. Now this is your UV editor, and it's where you can actually view the UVs of your object. And so when I go to this crab body, we're just gonna do automatic UVing, which is basically going to have Cinema 4D's UV algorithm just unwrap this for us automatically. So if I have this crab body selected, I'm gonna go to automatic UV, hit apply, and basically what you can see is that if I go to my polygon mode, you can see my object is now represented in a 2D manner over here on the left. So all of these different polygons coincide with some polygons on the 3D object over here. So if I want to select the front face, you can see, there we go, I'm selecting the polygons here. It coincides with the polygons on the 3D object right here. Okay, so UV unwrapping is literally just the flattening of a 3D shape into a 2D view, so you can easily be able to paint on top of it. Now we're going to do the same thing with our right claw, so you'll have something similar, and then our left claw. And so similar kind of setup. And now if I select all of these objects here, you can see that all the polygons are basically overlapping each other because at the end of the day, we have 3 spheres, right? So what we want to do is make sure that these UV islands, it's which these little UV segments are called, are not overlapping each other, because that's exactly what they're doing. We unwrapped them and they're all taking up the same space. They're all overlapping one another. So to prevent this, what we can do is go to this UV packing. And what this is going to do, if we hit apply, it's basically going to take all 3 of the UV islands that we just unwrapped and place them all in a single UV grid here. So this is all packed nicely. We no longer have those islands overlapping each other, so now we can paint on each of these individually. And these UVs will be contained in this material once we export this out. So that's all we need to do for right now. What we're going to do now is export this file to Substance Painter. Now, one gotcha is that Substance Painter does not support just importing Cinema 4D files. So what we actually need to do is go to Export and export out an FBX. Now, Substance Painter can support multiple file formats, but I like using S the most. And another thing to keep in mind is that we only really need to export out every object that's within this crab character hierarchy here. So everything that's a child of this crab character null, we want to export out, and not everything else, okay? So what we're going to do is go to File, Export, and we're going to go to this little gear icon that's going to give us more options for our FBX export. And so the big thing to change here is this option right here. So by default, this is going to be turned off, but what you want to do is select your crab character null with all the objects underneath it, and then we only want to export out those selected objects, okay? So since we have our crab character null selected, it's also selecting everything underneath it, all the children, and that's the only thing we need to change right here. So everything else should be good. We want to export out materials, all that good stuff, and we're going to hit OK. All right, so now that we're in Substance Painter, we're going to go and open up that FBX file that we exported out. So to do that, we're going to go to File, New, and this is going to bring up your new project dialog box. And basically, the template is what kind of material template do you want to be creating. We can just leave this as is. The file, we are going to select that FBX file. So I just named that FBX file crab. So I'll open that. Now the document resolution is basically what's the resolution you want to be creating these materials at. And this is kind of like what's your document resolution in, say, Photoshop. And once you start to get the hang of Substance Painter, you kind of get the feel that it's a 3D Photoshop, and it really is. It works very similar. But we're going to choose 2K at this point. And then the only other thing we need to worry about here is this auto unwrap. So we did some manual UV unwrapping of those three spheres that we ultimately want to paint on, but we also exported out all the objects that make up our crab, and we did not UV unwrap those objects. So what we want to do is we can utilize the auto unwrapping algorithm in Substance Painter to do the unwrapping of those other objects for us, because we're really not making a material with them, so we just need them as visual representation in our Substance Painter view so we can position the face and see what it looks like in relation to the eyes and stuff like that. So if we go to the options, what we can do, and I think by default it's set to recompute all, which is recompute all the UVs, all the seams, and all that stuff, but we don't want to recompute all the UVs. We only want to recompute the UVs on the objects that don't already have UVs created for them. So for us, we already created UVs for the sphere, so what we're going to do is say only generate missing data, okay? And so this is basically going to skip over any of the objects that already have UVs, and it's going to just unwrap the objects that don't have UVs yet and skip over those three spheres. So we're going to change all these different options to generate only missing data, and that's all we got to worry about here. So we'll click OK and click OK again, and you'll see there's our crab with all of our different objects in here. The left view is our 3D view, and the right view is our 2D UV view over here. Now, to move around in your viewport, it's very easy. It's all based on your Alt or Option key. So Alt or Option and clicking and dragging in your viewport is going to be your orbit. Alt or Option and middle mouse click will be your pan. And Alt or Option right click will be your zoom. So Alt or Option click or left mouse button is going to be orbit. Middle is pan, right is zoom. Okay, so everything's Alt or Option and either left, middle, or right mouse button, okay? And if you ever want to frame up your model in a view, just hit the F key with your cursor in that view. Same thing on our UV view, I can hit F. Now you can see this is basically your brush size here, and you can paint directly on a model here, and you're gonna see that I can't actually paint on this object. Why is that? Well, if we go over to our texture set list, now remember, in Cinema 4D, if I just jump back real quick, we have a bunch of materials here. And let me actually go back to our standard view, and you can see all the different textures that we have applied here. So the peach, and then we got just white and black and our red and our crab details. So you can see all the names of those materials. Now, if we hop back into Substance Painter, you can see each of those different materials came in as their own texture set list. And you can see that by default, the black shader here is the one that's selected. And you can see there's a corresponding layer list, again, just like in Photoshop. And so here, if I paint here, I'm actually painting anything that has that black material on it, which is the eyes. So that's that black material right here. Now, we don't want to paint on the eyes. We actually want to paint on the objects that have this crab details material applied to it. And you'll notice once I select that texture list, look at that. That's our UVs that we created inside of Cinema 4D. And so if we have that texture list selected, basically what we can do is paint directly on these objects. And you can see how that shows up in our view here. So you can see as I'm painting on my object in the 3D view as well. Now, this right here is a paint layer. There's two types of layers in Substance Painter, a paint layer and a fill layer. And you can access them right here. So that's your paint layer and that's your fill layer. Now, if I add a fill layer, what this allows me to do is just like a fill layer in Photoshop, it allows me to fill an entire object with a color or a texture. And so you can see down here in the properties, here is our base color, which we can go and change the base color of that entire texture set, which is applied to our claw and our crab body here. Now, I want this red color to be exactly the same color as the material that we're using inside of Cinema 4D. So what I'm going to do is just go over to Cinema 4D and I'm going to select this color chip, and to figure out what the hex color value is, I'm going to go to this button here and we can go over here and you can see what that hexadecimal value is of this color, which is C03B3B, which I totally expected that you would memorize or know just by looking at the color. I know I'm not good at colors, but if we go back and we go into our swatch, you can see that we can just paste that value right in there. And you can see there's the same color, that same red color applied to our object in Painter now. So one thing you might be wondering about is we have this default lighting in our view. You might be wondering, where is this coming from? And it's actually coming from an HDR image. So this is image-based lighting. If we go to our settings here, you can see our display settings here, the environment settings. We're using an HDR object. So if I bring up the environment opacity, bring down the environment blur, we're basically using just a 360-degree HDR image to light our scene. And so if we blur this out and bring this opacity down again just to hide it from our view, we can actually rotate this environment and kind of see how the shading looks like on our object. So the shortcut key for this rotation, which is kind of handy to see how our texture is kind of looking in this environment, is holding the shift key down and right-clicking and moving our mouse left or right. You can see that's controlling the rotation, but that's one thing I wanted to show you as far as shortcut keys go. And now, just like in Photoshop, we can double-click on a layer to rename it, and this is just our base material color, basically. In our layer here, we don't need this paint layer anymore. I'm going to delete it, and we'll create a brand new one by clicking this object here. And this is where I want to actually create our belly kind of highlight. So I'll just rename this belly. And so I just want to create basically just a circle on the belly here. And the one thing that's super cool, again, about Substance Painter is that it works very similarly to Photoshop. So we have, if you go to the leftmost menu here, you can see we have the paint tool, the paintbrush tool, our eraser, and we also have a path tool as well. And if I click and hold, you can see you can basically make a path that you can paint a stroke along, and then you can also create a filled path. So I actually want to create a filled path to start out with. And if we want to change up what view we're looking at this crab with, whether it's orthographic or perspective view, we can actually come up here and you can choose perspective or orthographic. You can see the shortcut key is F5 and F6. So F5 is the view we're already in, and F6 is your orthographic, and you can see that just kind of flattens everything out. And I kind of like to make and draw textures in this view. So with that pen tool selected, with the filled path active, I'm going to go and I'm just going to click, and you can see that just one click creates a point, and I can click again, click again, click again, and then again, just like in Illustrator or Photoshop, you can close that path, and you can see that basically what that did is that allowed me to create a path point that snapped to the surface of our 3D model here, which is super cool. So I can go over and hover over and click and move these points around and adjust them. And you'll see in our topmost menu, we have a Bezier handle tool. So if I have a tangent selected, I can go and adjust the Bezier handles. If I hold the Command and Control key down, I can adjust both Bezier handles at the same time and have it constrained to the same length. So we can go into each of these different vertices and kind of adjust these and change these to Bezier handles like so to really get the kind of look and shape that we're going for. So maybe I'll move this up. And again, if I'm moving this up, it's snapping to the surface, which is super cool. But you'll notice that as we snap to the surface, we're getting this kind of janky thing going on here. And this is because flat textures, when you apply them to a 3D object, they have a certain projection depth. And you can see that right here is our projection depth. And if we move this too low, it's almost like it's creating a flat plane that is not being applied to our curved convex surface here. But the more we increase the projection depth, we can kind of make sure that it's encompassing that entire view. So you can almost see that the projection depth is kind of going from here and then outwards. So we just want to make sure that it is encompassing it enough that we remove that kind of jankiness there. And so I would say this is looking pretty good. But what I want to do is I want to have this kind of peach color that we had on some of the accents of our crab model. So what I'm going to do is jump back into Cinema 4D and go to the peach color. And just like we did before, we're going to click on the up and down arrows, go to the hexadecimal numbers and copy it. And then here's the base color of the path fill that we're making. So I'll just click on that color chip and then just paste that in there. And voila, we have our peach color in here. And let's just say that's looking pretty good. So now let's go ahead and let's do the same thing and draw some little details on our claw. So we're going to go back to our pen menu and we're going to do the paint along a path because we're going to basically create a stroke. And what we want to do is we want to add this to a new layer. So I'm going to add a new paint layer and I'm going to rename this claw details. And what I'm going to do for this is we're basically going to paint these same claw details on the right and left claw. So what I can do is activate symmetry, and you can do that right here. You can see that little symmetrical line down the center. If you want to adjust what your symmetry is, whether you're mirroring it on the X, Y, or Z, you can change that up here. But for right now, the default of mirroring on the X works just fine. You can see the symmetry plane. You can change the color here. So you can see that there. You can even turn on the physical plane as well. I'm going to go and just turn that off for now. And now what we can do is just like we painted on the surface of the body, I can also click and create some points here as well. And you can see this is where having the orthographic view where it kind of flattens everything out comes in handy. Now what you don't want to do is close the path because this will close the path kind of through your 3D geometry. So I'm just going to click and then adjust this. And you can see what we just did there. And now what this is doing is it's creating a path and then applying a stroke to it. Now you can see that the path is based on the brush size and the hardness that you can choose right here. So if you want to adjust the size, you can do that by adjusting the brush size here. And then if you want to adjust the hardness, we're going to go all the way down and adjust the hardness right here. Okay, so maybe you want just a little bit of softness there. And let's create a smaller size. So maybe something like that. And then what we can do is we can at any time go and add more points. So you can see if you hover over that path, it's going to add another path there. So let's just create like a little notch like so. And then we'll go to the back side and do the same thing. So I'll just add a point there, add a point there. And you can do the same thing again where you can go and create Bezier handles and really get into the nitty gritty. But I think this is looking pretty good just as is. If you want to delete a point, you can go and select the point and just hit that button there and remove any excess points. So one of the really cool things too is you can add a little bit of taper as well. So if you want to select a point like so, you can go up to the pressure and bring down the pressure, and you can see that's adjusting the brush size basically from the 1 point to that final point right there. So let's just say this is a pressure of 30. And so you're going to see if I just try to click this point, it's going to close that path. And so what I'm going to do is just Command or Control Z to undo that. And to select this point, I'm just going to click and hold and just move it around. And that's going to allow me to select that point. And then I can go and adjust this pressure to 30 as well. And then just click and hold and move that. And so you can see we got this nice taper on both sides, again, because we have the symmetry on. So at any time with this path selected, I can change the size of the path. I can change the base color here, so I can change this to black. And then another cool thing too is, just like Photoshop, we can go and use different types of blending modes. We can adjust the opacity of this layer and maybe take on a little bit of that base material color underneath and have that show through a little. You can do the same thing with the belly as well. Maybe you can use a blending mode if you wanted to. So again, if you're familiar with Photoshop, this whole layer system using blending modes should be very familiar. So we have our claws. Again, if we ever want to go back and change the details, we just got to click on that path and we can adjust anything here, like the size. And what I want to do now is kind of add some specular highlights. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to add a new paint layer. This will be spots. And then with the filled path tool active again, I will go and we can keep symmetry on because we can have the same spots on both sides. And I'm just going to create some circles here, some nice specular highlights. So that's looking good. Let's create another spot. You'll notice that I can't click and create a new path here. To create a new path, I'm going to hit the escape key and then I can go and create a new spot here. Then I'll create a whole new path. If you want to see your paths at any point, you can go to this scroll down here and select which path you want to work with. So let's create one more path. So I'll hit escape and then I'll just make a little small path here, or a small spot here. So something like that. Another cool thing too is at any point we can reposition this entire path. So if you want to select the entire path, what you're going to do is hit Command or Control A. And what you could do is grab the move tool here and you can move this around. And I can go and like just move this around like so, which is super cool. So if I want to select this, Command and Control A to select all, and then just move this around. And we can even scale this as well. So the shortcut keys are W, E, and R. So W is just your move, E is your rotate, and then R, which you would think is rotate, is actually your scale. So you can scale this up or down. And if you click and drag in the 3D cube area here, that's going to uniformly scale. If you scale in just one direction, you can grab on just these singular axes here. But pretty cool how you can just like create a path on a surface and then manipulate it whatever way you want. Let's just say we're happy with what we got. Now we need to still add a face. So what I ended up doing was I created a face inside of Photoshop. And you can see that here. And so I just saved this as a Photoshop file here. And the cool thing about this is that in Substance Painter, you can go and here's my PSD file. I can just go and drag and drop this into my Substance Painter viewport. And I'm going to import this as a base color. And you can see that this just applies this as kind of like a decal. And you can see how this is kind of following the surface here. And it's using this surface placement tool. And so there's similar things inside of Cinema 4D as well, but we can scale this up again using the R key and scaling this up uniformly, or scale this in the Y a little bit. But I'd say this is looking pretty good. You move this down. And again, if you don't have the correct projection depth, you're going to see that, especially on these arrows, you can see how deep that projection depth is of this texture. So if it's not quite enough, it's not going to wrap around that curve. So just keep that in mind when you import this object. And so there's our crab face as a new layer. Again, you can adjust the opacity. And one of the cool things about working with different types of texture files and stuff is that we can go, and if we wanted to change the face here, so if I wanted to go into Photoshop here, and maybe I want to move the smile up a little bit, what I could do is enable automatic updates. So inside of Painter, if you click this button right here, you can turn on automatic updates. And what this is going to do is look and see if any of the assets updated, and it will just automatically update and refresh in your viewport. So you want to turn all these options on. And so we can go into Photoshop. Let's just move the smile up a little bit. and hit save, and then go back into Painter, and you'll see that that automatically updated. Now it probably was pretty subtle to see, so let's actually make a big change. Let's move this way down, hit save, go back into Painter, and then you can see that automatically updated. I didn't even have to go in here and say update anything, but it just automatically updates. And this is a really cool feature inside of Substance Painter where you can kind of procedurally work like this. Maybe someone else is working on a texture and continually updating it, and you don't have to really worry about having the latest and greatest assets. It's just going to automatically update over here. So super cool. So let's just say this is looking good. We got our belly texture, our face texture on there. We added all these really nice details to the head and the claws of our character. Now let's go and let's bake this out as a texture and bring it into Cinema 4D. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to go to this little export button here, and we're going to say export textures. And what we're going to do is it's going to ask you, okay, which texture sets do you want to export? Right now it's going to export everything, but we only painted on the crab details area here. So what we're going to do is just make sure that this is the only texture set that is selected. So I'm going to Alt or Option click on that checkbox to just isolate and select this crab details. And then when you click on it, you can see which maps you're going to output. So you can output your color channel, your roughness, metallic, your normal, your height. But for us, we only care about the color channel or the diffuse color that has all the color information that we just painted. So we're going to uncheck all of these other ones, and then we're basically ready to go. Now, if you wanted to export out a bigger size, you can do that here. So maybe we want to go 4K, we can totally do that. And then we're going to go and we are going to export. You're going to see, okay, there is the name of the file, it is the base color, it's 4K. PNG, 16 bits. That's the name of the file. If you want to see where it exported, you can go to the Open Output directory, and there is my texture. And now we can go back into Cinema 4D, and we can go back to that crab details material here. If you don't have your material manager already open, just double click on that crab details. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to simply drag and drop that base details color, drag and drop that into my node editor here, and just plug that into the base color, and you'll see, voila, we now have all those materials that we painted in Substance Painter applied in Cinema 4D. Now you'll see that everything looks kind of aliased here, and that's simply because in our material, in the viewport tab, there is a default preview texture size. So it's showing us a lower resolution than what we really have. So we actually exported a 4K, so we could view this at 4K, and you can see that changes that kind of pixelated view to a nice crisp texture. Or if you wanted to kind of save on RAM, you can bring this to 2K and it looks just as good. But that is basically it, and how you can use Substance Painter to paint your own textures, your own stylized textures at that, and apply it to your materials inside of Cinema 4D.